I began to notice that Trevor started staying late at work more often and seemed to be drifting away from me. In recent months, he was hardly ever home. He kept mentioning late meetings and business appointments, but I felt that wasn't quite right. Of course, I understood that his job demanded a lot of time and attention, but still, why did his eyes become so cold? Why did he start avoiding our plans, which used to bring us so much joy? One evening, I accidentally saw a message on his phone. Trevor was in the shower, and his phone screen lit up with an incoming message. The sender was Melissa, his boss. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," it read. My heart sank. Wonderful evening? What wonderful evening? I remembered he mentioned a business meeting, but somehow I didn't recall him saying anything like this. That moment sparked the first suspicions in me. I began to notice how he smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking and how he hid it whenever I was near. What if there was something between them? I knew I had to find out the truth. With each passing day, my suspicions grew like a dark shadow creeping over everything good that once existed between Trevor and me. I tried to brush off these thoughts like an annoying fly, convincing myself that it was all just in my head, that I was exaggerating and imagining things that weren't there. But every time I saw that cold look in his eyes, the anxiety inside me grew stronger. Trevor started leaving early in the morning and coming back late in the evening. When I asked him why he was late, he would briefly reply that work required it. At first, I tried to believe him, but each time his explanations grew shorter and his distance more noticeable. A dull pain began to form inside me, and I started feeling like a stranger in our own home. One evening, as I was returning home after a long day at the office, I had to walk past the cozy cafe on the corner. This place had always been Trevor's and my favorite. We often spent our weekends there over a cup of aromatic coffee. I stopped for a moment, reminiscing about the days when he was still present, when we laughed and talked for hours. But then, my gaze fell on a familiar figure. Everything inside me turned upside down. Trevor was sitting by the window. Across from him, leaning forward, was Melissa. I immediately recognized her from the photo on Trevor's company website. Long chestnut hair, bright lipstick, a confident smile. They were too close to each other. It seemed like there was some invisible tension between them. Melissa laughed, lightly touching Trevor's hand. He was smiling too, but it wasn't the smile I knew. It was a different smile, as if he was hiding something. I couldn't look away, and a strange feeling began to grow in my chest. I felt the anxiety rising, turning into a dull but distinct pain. I knew I couldn't just walk by. My heart was racing, and I could hardly breathe. I grabbed my phone and took a few pictures, trying to remain unnoticed. Everything inside me was burning. What are they doing together? I asked myself. Why didn't he tell me anything? On my way home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Various scenarios ran through my mind. I imagined them together after work, strolling through the park, laughing, sitting in a car wrapped in a blanket, or even... No, I couldn't think about it anymore. My jealousy began to overwhelm me like an avalanche, one I couldn't resist. All night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, and the images of Trevor and Melissa in my mind wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to calm the trembling in my hands, but it was useless. The only question in my head was, what will I do if they are really together? I had no answer, but I knew I had to do something. The next day, I decided not to go to work. Instead, I went to Trevor's office. I stood outside the building, watching people come and go. My heart was pounding so hard I could hardly focus. After some time, I saw him coming out of the office. He was with Melissa. They walked side by side, their eyes meeting again. Melissa lightly touched his shoulder, and Trevor seemed to smile in response. That smile made a cold wave wash over me. I followed them at a distance. They went into a small cafe nearby, the same one I had seen the day before. I stood outside, watching them through the window. Their faces were too close. Their conversation looked so intimate. I felt my head begin to spin, and for a moment, I thought I might fall. I took a few more pictures. My heart was breaking and jealousy was burning my soul. I didn't know what to do, but I understood one thing. I could no longer endure this unknown. I had to do something. I had to find out the truth. My suspicions about Trevor and Melissa were eating me alive, like a gnawing pain that wouldn't go away for a minute. I couldn't focus on work, friends, or my daily routine. The same scenario kept replaying in my head. There was something between them, and I had been clueless all along. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they only grew stronger, eventually turning into certainty. One evening, when Trevor was once again working late, I decided to go out to a bar. I needed a distraction, something to drown my despair in a glass of wine, or maybe something stronger. I felt completely lost, and it only took a drop to make this sea of anger and pain spill over. The bar was noisy, but that was exactly what I needed. Loud conversations, laughter, music, all of it helped to drown out my thoughts, if only for a moment. I sat at the bar and ordered a glass of red wine. One glass turned into 2, then 3. Alcohol, as always, became my temporary refuge from pain and doubt. I felt myself slowly but surely starting to relax. And then I saw him. Lucas, Trevor's younger brother. He was sitting at a table in the back with some of his friends, laughing, his voice easily recognizable. I knew Lucas. We had crossed paths at family gatherings, and he always seemed like a nice, charming guy. But I also knew he had feelings for me. He tried hard to hide them, but his glances, his attentive demeanor during family dinners, and his light compliments all betrayed his interest. And now, seeing him here, I realized he could be the perfect tool for my little revenge. I approached his table, and when he noticed me, he smiled widely. "Laura, what a surprise," he said with a light smile. I felt my heart tighten with a mix of anger, alcohol, and a strange excitement. "Unexpected, but very fortunate," I replied, smiling back, feeling my smile grow more provocative. I began to flirt with him, and I immediately knew that my suspicions about his feelings were correct. Lucas enjoyed my attention. His eyes lit up at every word. He responded with enthusiasm. His touches became more frequent and bolder, and I allowed it to happen. The alcohol gave me courage, and his interest ignited in me a desire to go further. We decided to continue the evening in a more private setting. I knew I was playing with fire, but my soul screamed with hurt and I couldn't stop. We went to his place, and the moment we entered his apartment, I realized all boundaries had been erased. No rules, no morals, just passion and a desire to forget. The night was passionate, filled with unrestricted freedom. I knew Lucas had dreamed about me for a long time, and now I allowed him to fulfill those dreams. His kisses were hot and greedy. Mine were filled with desperation and a thirst to forget, even if just for a moment. We plunged into this forbidden whirlwind, forgetting about everything in the world. But in the morning, when the light broke through the blinds, realization dawned on me. Instead of the relief I had hoped for, I felt even more lost and guilty. Lucas slept soundly beside me, and I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what I had just done. I knew that this night had been a mistake, driven not by love, but by anger and pain. I had betrayed not only Trevor, but also myself. Deep down, I realized it had been the wrong decision. I carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake Lucas. The events of the previous night kept spinning in my head, and I felt a heavy sense of guilt filling me from the inside. It was wrong. There was no sense in it, and I had just made everything worse. I had cheated on Trevor with his younger brother. I had betrayed him, betrayed myself. And for what? I quickly got dressed, pulling my clothes from the floor, and quietly left Lucas's apartment. As I drove home, my thoughts were filled with anxiety and fear. What if someone found out? What if Lucas told? And most importantly, what would I say to Trevor? When I opened the door to our home, Trevor was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He looked at me with surprise. "You're back early. Where were you?" he asked. I felt everything inside me tighten with fear and guilt. "I stayed at a friend's," I lied, trying to sound as calm as possible. Trevor nodded, believing me without a single question. "I see. I'm going to take a shower," he said, and headed to the bathroom. As soon as I heard the water running in the shower, I knew this was my chance. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed he could hear it even through the closed door. I knew it was wrong, that I was invading his privacy, but I needed to know the truth. I had to find out if there was really something between him and Melissa or if it was just a figment of my imagination. I quickly grabbed his phone from the table and opened the messages. My breath caught as I began scrolling through the conversation. There were messages from Melissa. Her name appeared over and over again. They chatted about work, about projects, but some messages were different, more personal. "Thanks for dinner, it was wonderful," she wrote. Or, "I haven't laughed like this in a long time, you're just amazing." But there was nothing specific to confirm my worst fears. My hands were trembling as I held the phone. I felt my head spinning with emotions. What does this mean? I wondered. Is this just a friendly conversation or something more? I couldn't tell. I couldn't find any explicit proof of their affair, but my imagination painted the worst scenarios. I saw them together, smiling at each other, touching, Melissa throwing flirtatious glances at him. I felt hot tears start to well up in my eyes. Nothing concrete, but enough to make my jealousy and fears flare up with new strength. I quickly put the phone back in its place and hurried back to the kitchen, trying to calm my breathing. I knew one thing. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it was. My imagination wouldn't leave me alone. I kept replaying everything I had read on Trevor's phone in my mind. Those phrases from Melissa. "Thanks for dinner. See you soon. I miss our talks." Each word echoed in my head. I imagined them together, at dinner, at breakfast, sitting in a cafe, at the movies. All these scenes unfolded before my eyes with alarming clarity, even though I had seen none of them. But I saw them in my thoughts. Images flooded my mind. They were together in a restaurant. She was laughing at something Trevor said, and he leaned closer, his eyes sparkling. They were walking in the park, their hands accidentally touching, and then he touched her hand, and she smiled in return. What if it's true? I asked myself over and over again. My jealousy and fears only grew stronger. I could no longer endure this feeling. I grabbed Trevor's phone again, feeling my hands tremble. I needed more information. I decided to check other messaging apps where they might have communicated. My mind demanded proof, even though my heart screamed that I should stop. I started opening different apps, checking their conversations. Melissa's name kept appearing in each one. I stumbled upon a few more messages where she joked about their meetings, about some plans for the future. "Let's do our day again, it was so much fun," she wrote in one of them. Her words were innocent, but they only fueled the fire of my jealousy. Why are they messaging so often? Why does it all feel so personal? I wondered. In my mind, images were already forming of them spending time together, joking, flirting, maybe even more. I felt anger and helplessness taking over me. I realized I could no longer sit back and do nothing. I had to do something. I needed to protect my marriage as I understood it. I couldn't let Trevor and Melissa continue their meetings. I had to act, and quickly. But deep down, I knew I had done a terrible thing myself. I had cheated on Trevor with his younger brother, and though it had been a moment of weakness, I couldn't let him find out. I had to hide my mistake to preserve our marriage and protect myself from the consequences. I could no longer sit and do nothing. My thoughts, images, doubts, they were tearing me apart from the inside. Every time I imagined Trevor with Melissa, a wave of rage consumed me so intensely that I could barely breathe. I knew I had to do something. I had to protect my marriage, even if it meant acting recklessly. I drove to Trevor's office, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. My heart was beating so fast I could hardly breathe. I got out of the car, nearly running toward the office building entrance. People around me stared with curiosity, but I didn't care. I was walking with one purpose: to confront Melissa and put an end to all of this. When I entered the building, I saw Melissa in an open conference room. She was standing there talking to some colleagues, her voice calm and confident. But I wasn't going to wait. I stormed into the room, ignoring her surprised look. "We need to talk," I said, feeling the words burst out of me with force. Melissa looked at me, then at her colleagues, and nodded, asking them to leave us alone. Once they were gone, she turned to me, her face a mixture of irritation and confusion. "What's going on, Laura?" she asked. I stepped closer, and all my jealousy and anger spilled out. "Do you think I don't see what you're doing?" I began. "You're having an affair with my husband, and I won't let it go. You've ruined my marriage with your flirting." Melissa looked stunned but not scared. She sighed and shook her head. "Laura, you're mistaken. There's nothing between Trevor and me. I have a family, I have children. This is just work, nothing more." "Don't lie to me!" I shouted, feeling my anger flare even more. "If you don't stop having an affair with my husband, I'll do everything I can to ruin your reputation. I'll tell everyone what's going on here. You think your husband won't find out? You're wrong." Melissa seemed to lose her composure for a moment. I saw her face turn serious as she suddenly tensed. "Laura, I beg you, think about what you're doing. You're not only putting my career at risk, but also your life, your future." But I was too furious to listen. "Your husband will find out everything, and not just him. I'll tell all your colleagues how you throw yourself at every man in the office. Do you think no one sees how you behave? I know what you're doing. You've ruined my life, and I'll ruin yours." Melissa realized that I wouldn't stop. She took a deep breath, understanding that I was a real threat to her professional and personal life. When I left, I felt my rage subside a little, but along with it came the realization that I had crossed a line. Melissa knew I was a threat to her reputation. She decided to act quickly to avoid further problems. That evening, Trevor came home earlier than usual. He was grim and didn't say a word, just gave me a quick, angry look. I realized he already knew. He approached me, and in his eyes was something I had never seen before, a mix of hurt and disappointment. "You made a scene at my office, and now I've been fired," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "You've ruined my career." Trevor stood before me, his eyes blazing with anger. I had never seen him like this. His face was tense, fists clenched, and his breathing was rapid. I felt my knees begin to buckle with fear. "You've ruined my career," he repeated, his voice cold and hard like ice. I knew I had to say something, justify myself, explain my actions. "Trevor, I didn't mean for this to happen," I began, trying to speak as calmly as I could. I was so scared. I thought I was losing you. It seemed to me that there was something between you and Melissa, and I couldn't just sit back and watch my marriage fall apart." He looked at me, his eyes filled with contempt. "Scared?" he interrupted, his voice sharp. "You threw a fit at my workplace and threatened my boss. How could you do that, Laura? You just destroyed everything I've worked for years to build." I felt tears start to well up in my eyes. "I acted out of jealousy, out of fear," I tried to explain, my words struggling to escape the lump in my throat. I didn't know what else to do, but Trevor didn't want to hear it. He waved his hand as if dismissing all my attempts to explain. "You think that's an excuse?" he snapped. "You ruined my reputation, my career, and now you say you acted out of fear? Laura, that's not fear. That's madness." He stepped closer to me, and I stepped back, feeling panic rising inside me. He looked at me intently, and I could see he wasn't just angry. He was hurt. "You're too nervous," he observed. "You're hiding something, Laura. I know you too well." I froze, trying to keep a calm expression on my face. "No, nothing like that, Trevor," I replied, but I could feel my voice trembling. You're too upset, and that's understandable." He shook his head, and I saw a firm resolve in his eyes. "Laura, I know something is wrong," he said slowly, his voice sounding like an icy stab. "If you don't admit what's really going on, I'll file for divorce." Those words hit like a blow. I stood there stunned, in complete confusion. "Trevor, you can't. We can talk. I'll explain." But he wasn't listening anymore. "No," he said firmly. "I can't trust you anymore. You've destroyed everything, and if you don't tell me the truth right now, I'm filing for divorce." I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. I was in despair, not knowing what to do. Confess? But then I'd lose him forever. I felt thousands of thoughts rushing through my mind, and I didn't know what to choose. After all these emotional outbursts and threats, it became clear to me. I could no longer hide the truth. A sense of guilt filled me from head to toe like cold water. I realized that my deceit and my suspicions about Trevor had caused all these problems. But even worse was knowing that the real truth was far scarier. I looked at Trevor, seeing how his face was distorted by pain and anger. He was waiting for my answer, his gaze burning through me. I took a deep breath, mustering all my courage, though my voice trembled like leaves in the wind. "Trevor," I began slowly, feeling a tightness in my chest. "You're right. I should have been honest with you. I'm very sorry for everything I've done, for how I behaved. My accusations were unfounded. I let my jealousy and fear take over me." His gaze was hard, but I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, as if he wanted to hear more. "And what else?" he asked sharply, not taking his eyes off me. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, then, finally deciding, I said, "I was wrong to accuse you without proof, and I made a terrible mistake. I cheated on you." My words hung in the air like a heavy weight suffocating me. His eyes widened, and I saw his face change instantly, from shock to rage. "With whom?" he asked, his voice quiet but restrained, as if he were ready to explode. I knew that if I told the truth, that it was his brother, I would destroy not only our marriage but also their relationship. "It doesn't matter, Trevor," I replied, trying to speak gently. "It was a moment of weakness. I'm sorry. But it doesn't matter who it was." His face grew darker. "Don't you think I have the right to know who it was?" he almost shouted. I saw his hands clenching into fists, his lips trembling with anger. "It was someone I met by chance," I lied, feeling my heart pounding in my chest so hard it felt like it might burst out. He stood there in shock, realizing the depth of my betrayal. His eyes filled with pain, and I knew there was nothing I could do to change it. "You've destroyed everything, Laura," he finally said, his voice empty as if speaking to someone very far away. "I can't forgive you. This is the end." He turned and left the house, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I was left alone in the silence, realizing that I had just lost everything. I had ruined not only our marriage but also Trevor's career, and I needed to do something to at least try to make amends. I knew I had to start by fixing at least part of what I had broken. The realization that I had destroyed not only our marriage but also Trevor's career gripped my heart like a steel fist. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The guilt weighed on me every second. I knew I had to do something to at least partially fix the situation. I understood that I might have lost him forever, but at the very least, I could try to give back what he had lost because of me. I decided to meet with Melissa and apologize. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had no other choice. I gathered my courage and sent her a message asking for a meeting. To my surprise, she agreed. Inside, everything was trembling as I walked to this meeting. Melissa was the key to getting Trevor back to work, and I hoped I could find the right words to convince her. We met at a cafe, the same one where I had first seen them together and where all my suspicions began. I approached her table, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Melissa sat calmly, her face focused and serious. I sat down across from her and took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I began, trying to speak as softly as possible. Melissa nodded but said nothing, clearly waiting for an explanation. "I want to apologize to you," I continued. "My behavior was unacceptable, and I fully understand that. I acted under the influence of strong emotions, jealousy, and fear. I had no right to behave that way, and I am truly sorry." Melissa remained silent for a moment, then said, "Laura, your actions did have a significant impact. I had to protect my reputation and the company's work. But I understand you were going through a difficult period." I nodded, feeling relieved by her words. "I just wanted to protect what I thought was mine, but in the end I made a big mistake. Now I've lost everything, and all I can do is try to fix my mistakes." Melissa looked at me more closely. "Now that you are no longer with Trevor, you don't pose a threat to me or the company. Trevor was a valuable employee. He did a lot for the company, and I wouldn't want his career to be ruined because of this incident. I felt a spark of hope ignite inside me. Melissa, I understand you, and I am grateful that you are considering the possibility of his return. He truly was a remarkable employee, and I sincerely hope you can give him a second chance. Melissa nodded, thinking. I will consider it, she finally said. Now that you are out of his life and no longer causing problems, I may reconsider my decision to terminate him. Perhaps I will offer him to come back if he is still interested. These words gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe I couldn't restore everything I had lost, but at least one part, his career, could be saved. I realized I had taken the first step toward making amends for my mistakes. The days blended into one endless gray blur. I couldn't gather my thoughts, couldn't find my place. My mind kept returning to Trevor and what I had done. I sank into a deep depression, barely leaving the house, finding no meaning in anything. My entire life felt empty, devoid of purpose. But one morning I realized I couldn't stay within 4 walls any longer. I needed to go out, at least to breathe some fresh air. I decided to take a walk, and my feet instinctively led me to his office. I didn't know why I went there. Perhaps deep down I hoped to catch a glimpse of him, just to see that he still existed in this world, that I hadn't lost him completely. I walked slowly along the sidewalk, watching people hurrying about their business. My soul felt heavy, as if an emptiness had settled within me, making it hard to breathe. And then, as if by magic, I saw him. Trevor was standing near the office building, talking to someone on the phone. My first instinct was to hide, to run away, but something inside me kept me rooted to the spot. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He looked tired, but somehow more composed than the last time we saw each other. I took a step closer, unable to resist the inner urge. He noticed me, his eyes narrowing, his expression tense. He finished his conversation and walked over to me, clearly not expecting our encounter. "Laura," he said curtly, his voice steady but cold. "What are you doing here?" I felt my heart tighten at his tone, but I tried to smile. "I was just walking nearby," I replied, trying to sound as calm as possible. Did you go back to work?" He nodded, his eyes remaining wary. "Melissa offered me my job back," he replied, showing neither joy nor gratitude. I decided to accept. I felt a wave of relief. "I'm glad you're back at work," I said quietly. "At least something good came out of all this." Trevor looked at me with annoyance. "You think you helped?" he asked. "You think your interference made things better?" I sighed, trying to maintain my composure. "I know I can't undo what's been done, but I wanted to at least try to make amends." He shook his head, his face remaining stern. "Laura, your actions only complicated my life, but at least you fixed part of what you messed up." I felt tears well up in my eyes, but I held them back. "I understand that we can't go back to what we had, but I'm glad I did something useful for you." Trevor looked at me, and there was a mix of weariness and sadness in his eyes. "It doesn't change what happened," he said, his voice tired. "But maybe it will help us move on." I nodded, feeling a bit of the weight lift from my heart. I knew that nothing would ever be the same, but at least I had taken a step in the right direction. It had been a few weeks since I last saw Trevor. We hadn't spoken since, and with each passing day I realized more and more that our past couldn't be undone. I felt lost, as if I had been torn from my familiar world and thrown into emptiness. For the first time in a long while, I needed to find something that would make me feel alive again. I knew I had to start over, rebuild my life from scratch. One day, while browsing the local newspaper, I saw an ad for volunteers at a local animal shelter. Something inside me resonated, and I decided to give it a try. I needed something, anything, to hold on to, some kind of purpose. The first day at the shelter was tough. I didn't know what to expect and felt awkward. But when I saw how many animals needed care, something inside me shifted. Dogs with pleading eyes, cats cautiously approaching to sniff my hand, I felt my heart soften a little. Every day I came to the shelter and started my work by cleaning cages, feeding the animals, and taking the dogs for walks. At first it seemed like a routine, but over time I began to find meaning in it. I started to feel like I was doing something important. My help was needed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt useful. Gradually, I began to make friends among the other volunteers. We shared stories about our lives, joked and laughed at the awkward moments that happened to us at the shelter. I started to feel my self-esteem slowly returning. These people didn't know about my past, they didn't judge me. They accepted me as I was now, and that helped me feel better. With each day, I began to realize more and more that I could move forward. I decided to work on myself, to avoid repeating the mistakes I had made. I realized that I could be happy on my own, that I didn't need to keep looking back, but not everything was that simple. After learning about our divorce, Lucas, Trevor's younger brother, started showing more interest in me. He messaged me several times trying to start a conversation. He even suggested meeting, and I knew this was his attempt to establish a connection. Maybe he thought that now there might be a chance for us. But I realized that our relationship was just the result of my moment of weakness, my desire to get back at Trevor. I couldn't let myself drag Lucas back into my life. I didn't want to give him false hope. So I decided to meet him and explain everything honestly. We met in a small cafe. I could see he was happy to see me, but there was a hidden concern in his eyes. I gathered my courage and said, "Lucas, I want you to know the truth. What happened between us was a mistake. It was just a moment of weakness, and I used you to get back at Trevor. I'm really sorry it happened this way." His face changed. I saw pain flicker in his eyes, but he quickly composed himself. "You just used me?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, feeling the weight of my confession. "Yes, and I don't want you to hope for something more. It wouldn't be fair to you. I don't want to give false hope." Lucas was silent, his eyes full of disappointment. Then he nodded, as if he finally understood. "I get it. In that case, we probably shouldn't stay in touch." I understood his disappointment, but knew it was the right decision for both of us. We said our goodbyes, and I felt another weight lift from my shoulders. I decided that I would keep moving forward, and that this chapter of my life had to end. I couldn't get the thought out of my head that Trevor was back at work. It was a small comfort, albeit a temporary one. I knew I still felt guilty for ruining his career, and despite his anger, I had to try to do something to make amends. Perhaps I couldn't bring back our love, but at least I could restore our relationship as people who once loved each other. I decided to meet with Melissa again. Last time she was willing to listen to me, and I hoped that this time she could help me even more. I sent her a message asking for another meeting, and she agreed. When I entered the cafe where we had agreed to meet, Melissa was already sitting at the table. She looked calm and confident, as always, and it made me nervous. I approached and sat across from her, feeling my heart beat faster. "Thank you for agreeing to meet again," I began, trying to speak calmly. Melissa nodded, her face remaining neutral. "I wanted to apologize to you once again," I said, gathering my courage. "I realize my actions were wrong, and I'm grateful that you gave Trevor the opportunity to return to work." Melissa gave a slight smile, her gaze attentive. "Laura, I've already accepted your apology," she said calmly. "And yes, Trevor returned to work because he's a good employee." I felt this was my chance. "Melissa, I know we don't have a close relationship, but maybe you could help me reconnect with Trevor?" I began cautiously. "Maybe if you talked to him, told him I've changed, that I regret what happened, maybe then he would give me a chance." Melissa frowned and shook her head. "Laura, I understand your feelings, but I don't want to interfere in your relationship with Trevor," she replied firmly. "That's your business, and I think you should find a way to fix the situation yourself. I don't want to be a mediator." I felt my hopes begin to crumble, but I tried once more. "I understand," I said quietly. "But maybe you could just tell him that I'm trying to change, that I want to start over?" Melissa looked at me with sympathy, but her answer was just as unwavering. "Laura, you need to focus on your own life," she said. "It's not worth living in the past. You have to think about your future and how you want to build it. Try to let go of all of this." Her words hit home. I felt my eyes fill with tears, but I held them back. "Thank you," I said, feeling the realization of her truth wash over me. "I know I need to move on, but it's hard." Melissa smiled and placed her hand on mine. "It's always hard," she said gently. "But sometimes you have to let go of the past to find something new." I realized she was right. The past couldn't be returned, and the only thing left for me was to start looking forward. I nodded, getting up from the table. "Thank you for your honesty, Melissa," I said. "I'll try to follow your advice." As I left the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe this was the first step towards a new beginning. I had to stop clinging to the past and start building my future. The past few months have been a journey of searching, not just for new activities and meaning, but for myself. After my meeting with Melissa, I realized I couldn't change the past and needed to focus on the future. I decided to continue therapy, even when it felt like it wasn't providing relief anymore. Each session was difficult. In therapy, I began to dissect my mistakes, step by step, as if examining them under a magnifying glass. I had to acknowledge what I had long denied. My jealousy and impulsiveness had destroyed everything that was dear to me. I tried to understand why I so often acted without thinking about the consequences. And these sessions helped me realize that the root of my problems lay not with others, but within myself. I began to feel more confident and stronger. Instead of focusing on what I had lost, I started to pay more attention to what I could gain. Through therapy, I learned to look at my weaknesses not as something inevitable, but as opportunities for growth. It became clear to me that I needed to change my attitude toward myself. I decided to work on my communication skills, to learn to express my feelings and needs openly, without fear or accusation. I began to realize that my low self-esteem often made me feel threatened and find problems where there were none. I had to learn to accept myself as I was, with my mistakes and flaws. Fighting jealousy was especially challenging. I often found myself thinking back to how my jealousy and suspicions about Trevor had destroyed our marriage. But now I understood that this impulse was destroying me. I realized that I couldn't control the behavior of others, but I could control my perception and reactions. I started training myself to fight impulsiveness. When I felt anger or fear building inside me, I learned to stop and think. I asked myself questions. What exactly am I feeling? Why am I reacting this way? What consequences could my actions have? These questions helped me slow down and make conscious choices instead of acting on emotion. Gradually, I began to notice changes in myself. I became calmer and more balanced. Now, I could look at myself in the mirror without fear or hatred. I learned to respect my boundaries and understand what I truly wanted. I began to accept my weaknesses without trying to hide them from myself. Every day, I took small steps to become the best version of myself. I decided that I would no longer make the mistakes that once destroyed my life. And though the path to healing and growth was long and difficult, I knew it was worth it. There were still moments when I felt lost or scared, but now I knew I could handle it. I understood that I had the power to change my life and become the woman I had always wanted to be, confident, strong, and at peace. I had always known that change was scary, but I also understood it was necessary. After months of therapy and self-reflection, I realized that to truly leave the past behind, I needed a fresh start. I made a decision that had been growing inside me for a long time, to move to a new city where no one knew me or my story, where I would have the chance to recreate myself. Packing all my belongings into a few suitcases, I looked around my apartment one last time. This place was filled with memories, both good and bad. I knew it was time to let them go. I closed the door behind me and felt a lightness in my chest, as if, along with the door, my old life had closed too. The move wasn't easy. I chose a small town that I had always wanted to visit but never had the courage to before. It was a place with charming streets, cozy cafes, and people who lived a calm life. I decided that this was where my new journey would begin. In the first few days, I felt like a stranger, unfamiliar with this town and its rhythm. But strangely enough, it felt good. I had a new job, a small real estate agency where I was welcomed with kindness and understanding. Here, no one knew about my past mistakes and I could be myself, without the shadow of former failures. I began to adjust to the new rhythm of life. Morning walks down quiet streets, a cup of coffee at my favorite cafe, work that brought me satisfaction. I felt confidence gradually returning as I started to trust myself and the world around me. There was no more room for fear or doubt. Instead, I was filled with determination and a desire to move forward. I knew I wouldn't look back anymore. I had learned from my mistakes, and they had become my guiding stars. They were no longer a burden I had to carry, but an experience that helped me grow stronger. The story of my past was complicated and tangled, but now I understood it didn't define me. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could change how I reacted to it. I could choose a path of forgiveness and acceptance, not just for others, but for myself. On this new stage of my life, I started making plans for the future. I knew I still had a long way to go, but I felt ready for it. I was no longer afraid of the unknown, no longer afraid of being alone. I knew my story was only beginning. With each passing day, I felt more confident that the future could be bright. Let the past stay in the past. I was ready to face the future with an open heart and a clear mind. I felt strength and determination within me to move forward, to live a full life, free from regrets and old fears. And so I began my new journey, knowing that much was unknown ahead, but also much was beautiful. I realized that my healing and growth had only just begun, and that was the beauty of it. For the first time in a long time, I felt confident and calm, ready to meet each new day with a smile.